Story 1. The sound of silence. The quiet was the first thing that truly terrified Elias. It wasn't the standard suburban quiet, the dull thrum of traffic or the distant wail of a police siren. This was a silence so complete and heavy it felt like atmospheric pressure bearing down on his eardrums, a thick, suffocating blanket woven from snow and absence. He awoke, not to an alarm, but to the blinding, unfamiliar daylight streaming through the arched bedroom window. He blinked at the bare mattress beside him. The twin suitcase stands, usually weighed down by their parents' expertly packed bags, were empty. The air in the enormous house, typically buzzing with the pre-holiday chaos of 4 siblings, was stagnant and cold. Elias, 16 and prone to sleeping through disasters, sat up. He ran a hand through his tangled hair. They were gone. They hadn't just left for the airport, they had gone to Paris without him. His phone confirmed the impossible. A single, hastily typed message from his mother sent at 4:30 a.m. Elias, sweetie, the flight got moved up 4 hours, and in the rush, we thought you got a ride with Carol. So sorry. Don't panic. We left $500 in the kitchen jar. Be back Saturday. Stay safe. Love you. Elias stared at the screen, a strange mixture of disbelief, adrenaline, and pure, self-pitying rage welling in his chest. Abandoned. He, the middle child, the quiet one, the easily overlooked one, had finally been overlooked into literal isolation. But as the initial shock wore off, a dark, primal excitement took hold. 5 days. A sprawling, 3-story Tudor house in the middle of a blizzard. Total freedom. He was the temporary king of a small, gilded castle. He pulled on a hoodie and sweatpants and headed downstairs. The kitchen was exactly as they had described. A fat stack of bills sat under the ceramic cookie jar. He grabbed a bagel, tossed it in the industrial-sized toaster, and for a glorious 5 minutes, contemplated playing metal music on the massive, antique stereo system in the living room at full volume. It was during the 3rd bite of his bagel, staring out at the unnervingly pristine snow blanketing the long driveway, that the atmosphere shifted. The exhilaration evaporated like steam. The silence returned, but this time, it was accusatory. The house, usually a warm, noisy hub, was now a hollow echo chamber. Every shadow seemed deeper, every glint of reflected snow from the window a malicious eye. It felt less like a home and more like a very large, elaborate tomb designed to amplify small sounds. And then, he heard one. It came not from upstairs, not from the front door, but from the concrete belly of the house, the cellar. It was a low, definite click. It sounded mechanical, deliberate, and entirely out of place. It wasn't the groaning of the old furnace or the settling of the floorboards. It was the sound of a locking mechanism being manipulated. The cellar door was in the pantry, hidden behind a tall, freestanding spice rack. His father always kept it double-locked, ever since a flood 3 years ago ruined $1,000 worth of stored wine. Elias put his bagel down. The excitement of freedom was instantly replaced by a cold, metallic taste of fear. He crept to the pantry, his bare feet silent on the cold tile. He slowly, painstakingly slid the heavy spice rack aside. The door, thick oak-painted forest green, was closed. He leaned in, his ear pressed against the wood. Nothing. Just the slow, rushing sound of his own blood. With trembling fingers, he reached for the latch. It was slightly ajar, not locked. It was waiting. He knew, with the sickening certainty that only absolute terror can provide, that whatever had made that sound was not an animal, and it was no longer in the cellar. It was in the walls. Or it was in the house. Elias backed away slowly, swallowing the urge to scream. The realization was stark and simple. Whoever or whatever was here, it hadn't broken in after they left. It had been here before they left. It was lying in wait, perfectly silent, until the last, most negligible member of the family had been confirmed alone. His mind flashed to the old Home Alone movies his family watched every Christmas, but this wasn't slapstick. There was no joy, only the cold promise of pain. Survival instinct kicked in. He wasn't going to call the police yet. His parents had left him alone, and he had no proof. If the police came and found nothing, he'd be the hysterical kid who ruined their vacation. He needed proof. He needed time. He needed traps. Elias began a methodical sweep, securing the perimeter with whatever he could find. First, the stairs. He took clear, heavy-duty fishing line from his dad's utility drawer and ran it taut across the 5th step from the top of the main staircase, tying it to the iron balusters. He hung small, brass Christmas bells, the kind his mother used for mantel decor, onto the line at strategic intervals. A tripwire and an alarm. Second, the back door. He poured a box of dried, yellow split peas, sharp-edged and hard, across the length of the entryway rug, covering the entire threshold. Noise and pain. Third, the attic. He pulled the retractable ladder down and climbed halfway up, then retrieved the long, rusting snow shovel. He jammed the shovel handle horizontally between the ladder rungs and the attic joists, making the ladder immovable and creating a massive metal barricade across the opening. A solid block. Finally, the kitchen. He loaded a heavy cast iron skillet and a full kettle of boiling water onto the kitchen counter near the spice rack. Primitive, but effective. He was wiping his sweat, hard hammering, when the house spoke again. This time, it wasn't a click. It was a change in the ambient hum. The central air conditioning, which had been set to a low, quiet drone, cut out completely. Silence. Deeper, darker, and absolute. The electric current was gone. Elias ran to the utility closet in the mudroom. The main circuit breakers were shut off. All of them. Not tripped. Flipped. A sick understanding dawned on him. The intruder wasn't trying to come in. The intruder was playing a silent, patient game of cat and mouse, and they had just removed the house's life support. He was now alone in a massive, rapidly cooling wooden box, and every single trap he had set up was designed to announce his location, not the intruder's. He heard the heavy, soft sound of a footfall on the main floor. The floor that was one flight above him. It was slow, almost testing the weight. It wasn't running. It was stalking. Elias grabbed the cast iron skillet, turned off the burner under the kettle, and slipped into the unlit, silent darkness of the pantry. He pressed his back against the oak cellar door, the only exit he hadn't yet secured. He listened to the silence, waiting for the one deliberate sound that would seal his fate. Story 2. The pantry was pitch black, a tiny, windowless cavity of trapped air and spices. Elias was pressed so tightly against the cool oak of the cellar door that the wood grain left ridges against his back, his muscles trembling less from fear now, and more from sheer, sustained adrenaline. The silence returned, but it was worse than before. The cutting of the central air and the sudden death of the main circuit had not just plunged the house into darkness, it had killed its ambient noise, the life support of the dwelling. There was no refrigerator hum, no faint electronic whine, no distant drip. Just a perfect, ringing vacuum. He held his breath, straining to locate the footfall he'd heard moments before. It should be audible right over his head, on the second-floor landing. But there was nothing. The intruder wasn't moving. They were listening. They had made their move. cutting the power, and were now waiting for the predictable response, the frantic scurry of their prey. Elias had one advantage. He knew the house, and he knew the darkness. The pantry, which was now his bunker, had two exits. One was the main kitchen doorway, where the heavy skillet was uselessly resting on the counter. The other was a narrow secondary door leading into the seldom used formal dining room, which led, in turn, to the back of the house near the garage entrance. He chose the dining room. It was quieter and offered more cover. He lowered the cast iron skillet, a dead weight in his hand, and replaced it with a heavy, 7-inch long chef's knife from the block. The handle felt slick with sweat. He was not a fighter. He was a bookish kid whose primary weapon was his sarcasm, but the cold steel gave him a fragile, necessary sense of agency. Move now. He slid the pantry door open an inch, then two. The dining room was slightly lighter, illuminated by the ghostly blue of snow-reflected moonlight filtering through the tall, curtained windows. The furniture, antiques draped with heavy linen covers for the holidays, looked like slumbering ghosts. He slipped out, moving with the preternatural quiet of an animal focused entirely on self-preservation. He crossed the dining room, his bare feet sinking slightly into the thick Persian rug. He reached the doorway leading to the garage mudroom, pausing. This was the back staircase. Narrow, winding, and rarely used, leading directly to his parents' master suite. If he took this, he could avoid the main entryway and the tripwire, and potentially reach the attic before the intruder caught on. But what if they're waiting by the garage? A low, unsettling scraping sound originated near the main staircase, confirming his decision to go back of house. It was the sound of something being dragged across hardwood. Heavy, patient, not a crash or a stumble, but a deliberate haul. Elias realized with a fresh jolt of horror. The intruder wasn't just armed. They were building their own defenses. They were turning his house into their maze. He took the back stairs two at a time, ignoring the creaks, which were thankfully distant from the main action. The second floor landing was a long, dark corridor. He saw the faint, pale outline of the main staircase railings in the distance. He had to assume the intruder was now somewhere near the master bedroom, which overlooked the front driveway. He kept close to the wall, his chest heaving, listening. Nothing but the frantic lub-dub of his own heart. He slipped into his elder brother Caleb's room. Caleb was a tech fiend. Elias knew the closet had an emergency power bank for Caleb's gaming rig, and more importantly, a gun safe. His father was a recreational shooter who kept a legally registered hunting rifle locked away. He found the power bank easily. A glorious little rectangle of blinking green LED power. He plugged in his phone, ignoring the desperate call from his mother's frantic voicemail. He was not going to call them back, not yet. Next, the safe. It was recessed into the wall, camouflaged behind a framed photograph. Elias had watched his father open it 100 times, always warning him, "The code is for emergencies only, son." Elias punched in the 6-digit code 122588, Christmas Day, their family's founding date. The heavy steel door thunked open. The rifle was there, sleek and heavy. Elias knew how to load it. He'd been on hunting trips, but the thought of holding that kind of power, that finality, made his hands sweat even more. He closed the safe immediately. A loud, final confrontation was not his goal. He wanted to survive. He wanted to trap. Instead, he grabbed the small, silver emergency flashlight clipped inside the safe door. Armed with the knife and the flashlight kept off, of course, he headed back into the hallway. He needed to make it to the third-floor attic. That was his last real sanctuary, barricaded by the jammed snow shovel. He moved toward the main staircase, hugging the wall where his family's framed photos made a dark gallery. And then, a sound from below, sharp and unmistakable. Jingle. The brass Christmas bells he had hung on the tripwire. The silent alarm rang, not loudly, but with a dull, suppressed chime, followed instantly by the dry, rasping sound of something dragging heavily across the carpet below the tripwire. The intruder had found the fishing line. They hadn't tripped it. They had felt it and were now clearing it. This wasn't a panicked burglar. This was a professional, or someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who was patient, methodical, and chillingly prepared. The thought hit Elias like a physical blow. They knew I was setting traps. They had been in the cellar, heard the noise of the spice rack moving, and realized the forgotten middle child was now organizing a defense. The power cut wasn't just to stop the furnace, it was to blind the one person left. A wave of nausea washed over him. He was trapped between two opposing forces: the patient, calculating predator below, and the uselessness of his own defenses. He needed a distraction. He crept back toward the main master bedroom at the front of the house. The windows here overlooked the front yard and the drive. His father's heavy, leather-bound briefcase was resting on the nightstand, where it had been left in the family's mad dash to the airport. Elias grabbed it. It was heavy, filled with his dad's thick financial reports. He moved silently back to the head of the main stairs. He crouched down, holding the briefcase over the railing, directly above the central landing. He located the second-floor banister and counted 3 steps down. With a grunt of effort, he threw the briefcase directly toward the center of the stairs. The resulting sound was deafening. Crash, bang, thud. The heavy leather container tumbled down the wooden steps, slamming into the wall, before landing with a catastrophic echo on the first-floor landing. It was loud enough to convince anyone below that the remaining occupant of the house had panicked and thrown something heavy, a desperate, loud move. Elias didn't wait. The instant the crashing started, he bolted across the hall to the attic ladder. He seized the frayed pull rope and yanked the heavy wooden ladder down with a wrenching thwump. He scrambled up, throwing his feet over the first rung. He had to be quick. The noise would buy him maybe 30 seconds. As he reached the attic floor, scrambling over the insulation, he heard the response from below. Not a yell, not a curse, but the sound of heavy footsteps running, fast, hard, and directly toward the main staircase. Elias turned, facing the opening. He could see the pale rectangle of the access door 2 floors below. The corridor below was dark, but he knew the intruder was approaching the stairs he had just descended. He found the snow shovel exactly where he had wedged it, creating a perfect barricade. He pushed it harder, confirming it was secure. The ladder was blocked. No one could climb it without making an enormous, unmistakable racket. A moment later, he heard the sound of the intruder hitting the first floor. They must have seen the briefcase, perhaps even investigated it. Then, the footfalls stopped directly below him. Not on the second floor, not on the stairs. Directly below the attic ladder. They were standing on the landing. The person below was no longer running. They were simply standing there, still, breathing, listening. Elias held the knife, flashlight still dark, sweat pouring down his forehead and stinging his eyes. He realized the fatal flaw in his distraction. He hadn't just drawn the intruder away from the back stairs, he had drawn them to the source of the noise. Silence. Then, a new sound, quiet and methodical, scraped against the wall 2 floors down. It was metallic, high-pitched, and steady. Elias's mind raced. What was that? It was too controlled to be a slip. The sound continued for several unnerving seconds. Then, a pause, followed by a soft, clear thud against the wooden structure of the ladder, right where the snow shovel was jammed. The intruder wasn't trying to climb the ladder. They were testing the barricade. And then, a sound that froze the blood in Elias's veins. It was a voice, low and gravelly, carrying easily in the silent house. It didn't yell. It didn't demand. It spoke with unnerving calm, a casual observation thrown into the void. "Clever boy," the voice whispered, the words echoing up the vertical shaft of the ladder well. "But you're boxed now, and it's only going to get colder." The intruder knew where he was. They had acknowledged his traps, removed the power, and now they had him secured in the attic, the highest, most exposed, and coldest part of the house. Elias lay flat on the attic floor, the knife shaking in his hand, realizing that the game of Home Alone was over. This was a siege, and he was quickly running out of air. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.